So, just to review slightly what we were talking about last time, we're in the middle of a point here, reviewing. So, Rav Kook was describing to us the concept of bitachon hatshuva. Most people, when we think of tshuva, as we spoke about last time, think of something which is heavy, think of something which is scary, which is sad. Sometimes regret is a part of tshuva. But there's a whole nother world, there's a whole nother part to tshuva, which is filled with light. When it comes to Rav Kook in general, everything with Rav Kook is orot. And so oros hatshuva is, as we will see, is a compilation of Rav Kook's reimagining of the world of tshuva, poetic reimagining of the world of tshuva, not from scratch. Rav Kook wasn't making this up. He was drawing from other sources deeply in order to come to and arrive at a place of a revolutionary way of looking at the world of tshuva. So before we jump in, we're in letter Shin Ayin Ches. It's a letter, like we spoke about last week, that Rav Kook wrote to Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Charlap in the year 1911. And we are on the back side of the sheet that you have in front of you, if you have the photocopy, on the fourth line. V'habitachon holech u'mitgaber. Before we begin that, I just want to dedicate our learning this evening to Aryeh Yerfal ben Yehudit, our dear friend, who is post-op. He had a surgery today. He should have a speedy recovery, and I hope the surgery went well. I haven't heard from him yet, but I hope and trust that the surgery went well. And in addition to that, we're going to dedicate our learning this evening to Paula Bas Myra. Anybody else?
I'll say some names.
Okay. And David will recite the rest of the names quietly. So we're on the fourth line. And last time we were talking about the concept of bitachon hatshuva, really having faith in tshuva. Not being afraid of doing tshuva, not feeling heavy about tshuva, but rather being able to put your trust in tshuva. Being able to say that no matter what I do on this journey, no matter how many times I slip, I can always pick myself back up. And that will actually allow me to do more, to not be afraid to make mistakes. The frozen feeling that a person gets when they're trying to serve Hashem, but they're scared about the possibility of messing up, becomes somewhat negated when we recognize that tshuva is something which is before there was a world, there was tshuva. Built into the world is the necessity almost for stumbling, for falling. And from the very first pasuk of the Torah, or the second, I suppose, Bereshis bara Elokim eis hashamayim ve'eis haaretz. That's a good start. Hashem is creating heaven and earth. And the eretz is tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tahom. Tohu, chaos, and complete desolation. Choshech, darkness, al pnei tahom, on the face of the abyss. There's all these nasty kind of forces that are out there in the world, and Hashem knows that before He even starts to create the world. And so therefore, prior to giving us the possibility of falling, there is already the possibility of getting up. And as we spoke about last time, this is the last piece of introduction, then we'll start to read. As we spoke about last time, Hashem, in creating the world with the koach hatshuva as kind of the back burner kind of level of, you're going to make mistakes. This is necessary because the world is perfecting. It's not perfect. We spoke about this concept last time, that Rav Kook's idea of the relationship between Hashem and the world is that Hashem is perfect. Part of perfection is growing. But if Hashem is all-knowing and all-powerful, then there's no room for growth in the divine, kiviyachol. And so the way that Hashem deals with that, on the one hand very simply, on the other hand very mind-blowingly, is that Hashem says, I'm going to create a world that is imperfect, that will be able to grow, which is really an aspect of myself, which is growing, which is perfecting. And in order to make that happen, there needs to be the possibility of making mistakes also, because part of growth is making mistakes. So continue on line 4. V'habitachon holech u'mitgaber. Once we start to relate to tshuva in this way, we start to relate to tshuva in maybe with a different set of eyes, that it's more about trusting tshuva. as a friend that's there to help us on our journey. V'asimcha v'hatzlacha v'ziv adanim holech u'mitrabeh. This gentle joy called Teshuva begins to show its face more, become less afraid. Because as we continue to grow and as we become more perfect, so the stakes kind of, right? Imagine you have a kid, when I was younger I played piano, I still play piano, but when I was younger I used to do some recitals. So you work, for a few months, you learn a piece, and then you do a recital. And the parents come and whatever. So if the kid makes a little mistake here and there, it's no big deal. It's a kid. It's a piano recital for a 7, 8-year-old. But if you become a concert pianist, you become a professional, so then the little mistakes become more noticeable and it becomes more lo na'im for you when you make mistakes. As you continue to grow and you continue to perfect, as a person becomes a greater and greater tzaddikes or a tzaddik, so then the stakes become higher and the koach of tshuva, the bitachon of tshuva, becomes all that more present. Your ability to rely on tshuva and say, I have to trust myself to make a big decision right now. And it could be that I'm wrong because I'm only human. And yet, I can trust in the koach of tshuva to be there in the event that I make a mistake, when I make a mistake. And that's why we find a whole Masechta called Maseches Horios, which is all about when the Sanhedrin Hagadol in Yerushalayim makes mistakes. What do we do when the greatest Torah scholars of the generation make mistakes? And that Masechta also talks about when the Nasi makes a mistake. If a Nasi or a Melech makes a mistake, there's a special type of carbon that they bring. And Chazal say, Ashrei Hador, praiseworthy is the generation. When you have leaders who are able to admit the fact that they're not perfect and that they make mistakes, that they're just people. So as we continue to trust in Teshuva and continue to grow, the simcha and the hatzal of the ziv adanim holech u'misrabe. Ad sha'neshama matchila lahargish v'hargasha zaka pnimis v'adina ech kol azdonos l'kol madrigoseihem. And then, once a person starts to trust in Teshuva and starts to really get into the sugya of Teshuva, they start to understand how all of their past mistakes, the ones that they did by accident, and the mistakes that were not so much mistakes, but the mistakes that were called zdonot, where a person did something, with open eyes, they looked directly, and they said, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but either I'm not strong enough or I don't care, chas v'shalom. And they did what they did. When tshuva starts to develop itself in a person's life, because it's always there. There's a concept of tshuva that's it predates the creation. But when a person allows that ore of tshuva to come into their life, they begin to see how all of their previous mistakes become something which they kind of relish, almost. There's a story from Rav Simcha Bunim. Rav Simcha Bunim of Pshischa was one time traveling with one of his students, and they passed a certain town. And as they were passing by this town, the students started to sigh and started to And Rav Simcha Bunim said, everything okay? And he said, oh, Rebbe, before I was one of yours, before I was your Talmud, I lived in this town. And if I told you the stuff that I did in that town before I came and was chozer b'tshuva, before I rejoined the ranks, so to speak, you would throw me right off this carriage into the mud where I belong. And then the Rebbe looked at him, and he said, oh, Rebbe, I wish I could just erase all of it. And the Rebbe grabbed onto him, just be careful with the microphone, grabbed onto his shirt, and he said to him, chas v'shalom. He said, God forbid. He said, you and I are not going to be mevater on a single one of those averos. That means in Hebrew, we're not going to renege on a single one of those averos. We're not going to give up on any of them. Because every single one of them, now that you're with me and now that we're together and now that we're on this journey together, is nothing more than, or nothing less than, a stepping stone towards where you are right now. And eventually, if we do this right, we'll be literally nothing less than a crown jewel in God's keser, in Hashem's crown. Rabbi Nachman, Rav Kook and Rabbi Nachman, very connected with each other. So last year, during the summer, during Corona, I gave a series of shiurim on Rabbi Nachman's Tikkun HaKlali, which effectively the shiur was more or less a shiur on Tehillim, because the Tikkun HaKlali is 10 mizmorim of Tehillim that were handpicked by Rabbi Nachman, that he saw as kind of a synopsis, as the spark notes, if you will, of Sefer Tehillim, that if a person wanted ki'ilu, the koach, the strength of saying all of Sefer Tehillim in one shot, They could say these 10 kapitlach of Tehillim, these 10 prakim, and it has the koach of saying all of Sefer Tehillim. The first of those is called Michtam LeDavid. And the Mefarshim have big machlokes. What does it mean, Michtam LeDavid? Some Mefarshim say Michtam LeDavid means a crown of David. Like the word Kesem Tahor Paz, like we say from Anam Zmiros. Kesem Tahor Paz, a pure golden kesem means a crown. But we also know that the word kesem also means a stain. In halacha, kesem means a stain also. So which one is it? David HaMelech begins his tikkun haklali, his cure-all for tshuva. Here is the prescription, the doctor's prescription for tshuva. And the first words of that prescription are Michtam LeDavid, a michtam for David, which simultaneously means a crown of David, a crown of glory for David, something he's most proud of, or michtam, a stain, a blot that he can't get off his hand, no matter how many times he washes his hands. Some deep scar in his soul. Which one is it? So the answer is it's both. Because the scar, when properly dealt with, when we air the trauma of chet, because every chet is a trauma, when we air that trauma of chet and we come back, we lean on the koach of tshuva, and we return, then slowly those scars themselves become, war scars that become something that I show off and say, do you know where I came from? Do you know what I did to get to where I am right now? And so for Rav Kook says, as the koach of tshuva begins to roll to a boil, we start to feel how the zdonos become zechuyos. L'kol madregosayim. Whether we're talking about the worst averos that we ever did on purpose, v'kal v'chomer hashkagos l'kol mineihem, and the things that, as a human being, we just slipped up here and there, all of those mishafchin l'zechuyos gemuros, they all become full merits. The secret of what we were talking about before the shiur started, before the cameras were rolling, we were talking about this mysterious nature of free will, this paradox of, on the one hand, while I sit here in the presence of being able to make a decision in the current present, I look forward to that which is in front of me, and of course I have free will to pick up the pen, put down the pen, everything that's in front of me, but everything that's behind me, I'm able to look at all of those mistakes and say that those were mere falls that were necessary for me to get to the place that I am now. If I wouldn't have made that mistake, if I wouldn't have said that silly thing to my spouse, to my child, I wouldn't be as good of a parent as I am now, because after doing that, I now had that conversation. I did tshuva. I spoke to my child. I spoke to my wife or to my husband. I had that conversation with the friend that I had a fallout with. And now, not only was that not a bad thing, but it was the greatest thing that could have ever happened, because I speak to a doctor, every doctor knows that if a bone breaks in a place and it heals properly, the bone is actually stronger in that place than it was before. It's very unlikely that the bone will break again because of the way that the bone heals itself. It's much stronger than it was before. And all of those mistakes, whether they're zdonos or they're shkagos, whether they're on purpose or they're by accident, they're all nishapech to be zechuyos gemuros. So here we already see, I don't know, like I said before, where the Sefer got its name, Oros HaTshuva. Everything with Rav Kook is Oros. But here Rav Kook says that tshuva helps us to pull a treasure out of the dark. Rechush gadol osher rav, some unbelievable treasure trove that's mitoch otzros choshech, that's sitting in the dark, that's buried somewhere in the dark. It's interesting, Rav Dessler writes in Michtav Meliyahu that sometimes a person who is a great person, and great people, that doesn't just mean people that you read biographies about, it means us also. Sometimes a great person, each person on their own level, will make a mistake. This is an amazing idea. Sometimes we'll make a terrible mistake that's really not for their level, because there's a minor mistake that they weren't paying attention to, that if not for that major mistake, they never would have stopped to do an accounting of their life to find that minor mistake. In other words, Hashem will push their hand, like the Gemara says, David HaMelech wasn't shaykh to the mistake that he made. Am Yisrael with Cheda Egel, they weren't shaykh to that mistake. But there were other smaller mistakes that they never would have dealt with if not for the fact that Hashem Kiviyachol forced their hand to make a bigger mistake. So they say, whoa, what's going on here? I need to stop for a second, do an accounting, see what really my life is going, what's my day-to-day schedule, what's happening here, and then I find the minor mistakes together with that major mistake that I would have ignored otherwise. Because there's something which is hidden, be'otzras choshech, there's some treasure which is hidden down there in the dark. Listen to the pasuk that Rav Kook quotes a little bit out of context, but so beautifully. V'nafshi tig'al biyad tashish b'yeshuaso. Tasis b'yeshuaso. V'chol atzmosai tomarna Hashem mikamocha matzil ani mechazak mimenu v'ani ve'evion migozlo. He quotes the pasuk that my soul will rejoice in Hashem like a poor person who some vigilante came out of nowhere and saved him from a thief. In other words, the thief is time itself. The thief is being a human being in time and space. And tshuva is this thing that comes in, nafshi tig'al biyad ba'Hashem. Nafshi tig'al ba'Hashem. My soul will rejoice in Hashem. Tasis b'yeshuaso. It will exalt in His salvation. Chol atzmosai tomarna. All of my bones will sing out to Hashem. Micha mocha. Matzil ani mechazak. Hashem, you save the poor person from the person who's stronger than them. Mechazak mimenu. V'ani ve'avion migozlo. You save the destitute person from the person who's trying to rip them off. The Yetzer Hara, time itself, human frailty, these things are trying to rip a person off. It's the koach that Hashem created in the world. It's not a bad koach, it's a good koach. It's a good koach. It's good that Hashem created these koachos in the world that make us recognize that we're not perfect. It's entropy. It's the fact that things are falling apart.
It parallels the fact that Shiur was before creation.
Say more.
You have to go down to go up.
Yeah. The creation itself is a chait. That's what we spoke about last week. That creation itself is an occlusion of Hashem's presence in the world. Before creation, there was only Hashem. After creation, there is the appearance of things other than Hashem. So creation itself is a chait in the sense that it blurs our vision. It blurs our ability to see things as they really are. And tshuva is best translated as recalibration. Tshuva is recalibration. And so every time that there's an attempt by life itself to steal little moments of perfection because of the nature of being a human being in the world, tshuva comes along and allows us to rejoice. Nafshi tig'al ba'Hashem, tasis b'yeshuasa. So that's point one for tonight. Let's pause here for a second. Point one for tonight is to recognize that when we live in a world of tshuva as a card that I pull out and say, I'm going to be okay. I can always fix. As Rabbi Nachman very famously said, if you believe that you can break, if you believe that Hashem gave you the power to destroy, believe that you could fix. If you have enough self-confidence to think that you could actually break something or ruin Hashem's plans somehow, if you're delusional enough to think that, then recognize that Hashem also gave you the power to fix it. So point one is, once you have this bitachon in tshuva, recognize how the mistakes, the scraped knees that you collect along the way, the scars that you collect along the way, eventually and inevitably become something that leads you to higher levels of service of Hashem. And therefore something that you can rejoice in. Now, in addition to that, Beis, Rav Kook says, when a person sees tshuva as something that comes from a place of bitachon, hadeya mit'aleh ad l'romei oz. Now this is something you would not expect. As many things Rav Kook writes you wouldn't expect. Rav Kook writes, tshuva not only is not sad, and there's an aspect of bitachon, and it could change the past. Tshuva is edifying. Tshuva is something which can educate you. It can expand the power of your mind. How? Teshuva has the ability to grow your capacity for understanding. So we touched on this very, very briefly a moment ago, but now Rav Kook will spell it out very clearly. Everybody knows, everyone understands that when a child is small, when a child is still young, they're not very nuanced. They can't understand contradiction. If you love me, so then why are you causing me pain right now? Why are you giving me this shot? Why are you making me swallow this yucky medicine? Why are you making me go to sleep? I want to stay up. No? Yeah? So as you get older, you start to understand nuance, that things are not so black and white. Your mind begins to expand. Teshuva, because of the paradoxical nature of teshuva, that we could literally change the past. We could turn that which was bad into something which is good. That's a bit of a paradox. Teshuva, which is predicated on the understanding that I have free choice looking forward from the present, but I didn't have free choice in the past, but I had free choice when I made the decision, but now that I'm past that, it needed to happen. That's a very sophisticated way of thinking. And so Rav Kook says that teshuva actually has the capacity to expand our mind because it allows our brains to operate in this dualistic space where something and its opposite can both be true. What I did in the past, was that wrong? Well, if I look in the Shulchan Aruch, it seems to be it was wrong. But at the same time, I'm able to somehow understand, no, that was actually good. That's a very sophisticated way of thinking.
Sort of like how when you do something now, it's nevera, but then in the future, when you're looking back at it in the past, it's just like a stepping stone to teshuva and greatness.
Yeah, try to explain that to a 6-year-old. It's a very complicated thing to wrap your head around. Even to a 36-year or 37-year-old. It's a very complicated thing to wrap your head around. And so Rav Kook says that if we could somehow, and again, remember, this is before the Sefer came out, so if we could somehow encapsulate this incredibly profound intellectual underpinning of teshuva, we can really bring the world to like a philosophical place that it hasn't arrived at yet. Like a real paradigm shift in the way of looking at the world that will alter the way that people think completely. Now let's hear his words. Hadeya mit'aleh ad l'rome oz. Das itself, the human capacity for reason, will become more expanded if we can succeed at presenting this concept of teshuva to the world, of this recalibration. Shel olam elyon, olam sharashi havayos b'tzurasam ha'atzilas. A world where that which is presented as physical down here is still in its elemental, even theoretical state, when the world is still in its idea form. It's interesting, Rav Kook oftentimes is drawing from a lot of different worlds, which is why it's so hard to study Rav Kook, and we're doing our best here, you know. Rav Kook, sometimes, you know, there's a sefer that Rav Kook wrote called Reish Milin, which is actually printed in this same volume, where Rav Kook studies the letters of the Aleph Beis. They're little short paragraphs. A friend of mine actually did a series on the letters of the Aleph Beis of Rav Kook in Reish Milin. It's available online. And he went through all the letters of the Aleph Beis. Very complicated, very difficult sefer. And in that series, I remember he cited a commentary. There's a commentary which is not extant anymore. It was lost somewhere in one of the wars, written by Rav Yaakov Levine, who was actually my Rebbe's growing up. His father, that was his father. My Rebbe, Rav Avraham Yitzchak Levine, who was named after Rav Kook. His father was Rav Yaakov Levine. He wrote a 1,000-page commentary on this, you know, teeny little. It's like this long, the whole thing. And Rav Kook saw the commentary in his lifetime, and Rav Kook said that Rav Chaim Yaakov very much understood the Kabbalah in the Sefer. He understood the mysticism in the Sefer, but he didn't understand the philosophy that I was quoting in the Sefer. And Rav Kook was an expert he read everything, he knew everything. Rav Chaim Yaakov, he said, was able to see where I was alluding to certain things that are like, he got the Kabbalistic pieces, but Rav Chaim Yaakov, he was a yeshiva man. He didn't learn philosophy. Rav Kook had all these different parts to him. And so that's why when you learn Rav Kook, if you're a poet, you see poetry in Rav Kook's writing. If you're a scientist, you can see certain things in science. Rav Kook here is undoubtedly referring here to, there's a Platonic idea from Plato about the world of shapes and forms before they come into the world. Very pashut, very basic. I'm not an expert in philosophy. But very basically, everything in the world, when it comes down to the physical world, a chair, l'mashal, that I'm sitting on. So there's the physical chair that I'm sitting on, what we'll call the chomer of the chair. The Maharal speaks a lot about this as well. There's the chomer of the chair, the physical chair. And then there's the tzura of the chair. The tzura is a metaphysical idea of chairness. How good a chair is depends on how much the physical chair conforms to the philosophical idea of chair. Make sense? Rav Kook says that Teshuva is higher even than that world which is deciding the abstract form of things. Before you get into the physical space of the world, there is the abstract ideas of the world. And slowly throughout human history, we've kind of developed these abstract ideas and been able to, the philosophers of the world, and the Mekubalim, and the Hasidic masters, and the Bali Musar, all of them are pulling out these abstract ideas and trying to quantify them in a way that we can relate to. Higher than the world of that abstraction, which hasn't even been fully pulled down yet. There's some of it that we have in all the books that are on the shelf behind us. But there's this whole world of abstract ideas which are so high. Rav Kook says Teshuva is before even that. And so if we can access the world of Teshuva, then Memela along the way, automatically as almost a byproduct of that, we will automatically have access to this world of the abstract ideas and we'll be able to completely change the way that human beings think. That's all in this sentence right here. Hadeya mit'aleh, let's read it again. Hadeya mit'aleh ad l'rome oz. Our das, human reason, will elevate itself to the highest places. Shel olam elyon, to some higher world, olam shorashi, olam shorshe havayos b'tzurasam ha'atzilis. The world where things are still in their abstract form, their tzura atzilit. Binomam ha'elyon. Umahalech hasivuv shel kol davar chet va'avon matchil al yedei hitalut ratzon letov lekdosh Hashem lalechet ba'orach chaim. And this is also such a beautiful line here. And that way of living that we've kind of been just making do with until now, which is so circular. Hamahalech hasivuv shel kol davar chet va'avon. This world where we're kind of like going in circles and it's so crooked and it's not a straight path and we say something which is not entirely true here, so we have to make up for it by doing this and we're just schlepping around all the time trying to dance through hoops instead of just being straight about everything. It's this very circular path. You think about the Jewish people in the Midbar for 42 years when, for all intents and purposes, it was like a few days journey to get to Eretz Yisrael. Just wandering around in the desert, and that kind of imagery is what Rav Kook is drawing on here. If we stop living this life, which is just mehalech sivuv shel kol davar chet va'avon, and al yedei his'alus ratzon letov lekdosh Hashem, we start to tap into this inner drive, which is animating all of our lives to try to elevate ourselves to a place of holiness, to a place of good. Laleches ba'orach chaim, to start walking the straight path of life. Hamisavev bracha v'simcha olamim, which also has its twists and turns. It's also saviv, but it's leading us along the path of bracha and simchas olamim. B'chol hayitzur kulo. Tachas kol hashamayim yeshreihu va'oro al kol knafot haaretz va'akol poseach shira. Then everything begins to start singing. The Arizal has a line where the Arizal explains that halacha, all those dry, boring books of halacha, chas v'shalom, right? Chalila. Halacha is Roshei Tevos, Hariu LaHashem Kol Haaretz. The whole world is singing to Hashem. You ever look at a piece of sheet music? It's very boring. It's just black notes on a piece of paper. But if you know how to play those notes, Hariyu L'Hashem Kol Ha'aretz, the whole world starts to sing. The whole world begins singing. And so Teshuva is the path that reroutes our dissonant notes. It's like the violinist in the middle of his violin solo, it's like the deepest moment. He's like, his eyes are closed, he's in this violin solo in the middle of the concert. And all of a sudden, the guy who has those cymbals, comes along in the middle of the violin solo, and just while the guy's like, he's looking at the sheet of paper and he doesn't know how to read the music properly, and in the middle of the violin solo, he just starts smashing away on the cymbals, and he interrupts the soloist. And so that's what happens when a person kind of goes on this sivuv, this carousel of chaos that's trying to bring a person to a place of chet and avon. And tshuva is the ability to draw all of that back into the world of shira. HAKOHEN shira. It's interesting, Chazal and the Medrash described the first person to do tshuva was Adam HaRishon himself. Well, it was Cain, I guess, derech agav in this Medrash. That we'll read the line in a second. Rav Kook is alluding to this Medrash certainly. That Adam bumped into Cain on Sunday, Friday, Erev Shabbos, Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas. Got to spend Shabbos in Gan Eden. They're kicked out Motzei Shabbos. Sunday, I suppose Cain killed Hevel. And Sunday afternoon, Cain's walking around, and Adam bumps into him after the whole aftermath and says, "Nu, how'd it go? Like, how'd your court case go with Hashem?" And Cain said, "I did tshuva. Hashem let me off the hook. 7 generations." So Adam HaRishon says, "I didn't realize the koach of tshuva is so profound. Mizmor shir liyom hashabbos." That's what the Medrash says. Adam HaRishon said, "Mizmor shir liyom hashabbos." That's what he responded when Chazal see Mizmor shir liyom hashabbos has not as much to do with Shabbos as much as it has to do with the Shabbos is from the lashon of tshuva, lashuv, Shabbat, lashevet, to return. Mizmor shir liyom hashabbos. What an unbelievable song the song of tshuva is. The song of tshuva is the thing that takes all of those slamming of the cymbals at the wrong time in our life and starts to put the pieces back together and kind of edits out all those parts, and in fact maybe incorporates that in a way that makes the song even more beautiful. So says Rav Kook, Hakol poseach shira. Shiras Adam HaRishon. It's the song of Adam HaRishon. What song of Adam HaRishon? The one that we were just referring to. Bekocha shel tshuva, mizmor shir liyom hashabbos, ki simachtani Hashem bepa'alech b'mas yadecha aranein. The world is no longer this, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, who is such an unbelievable writer, amazing. Rabbi Akiva Tatz, in one of his books, I think it's in World Mask, he describes the experience of a person riding on a train. And the train is going to some very pleasant destination. You're taking the train to go pick up your spouse after they've been away for a few weeks. And the train makes this kind of cyclical sound. And so since you're in this place of inner calm, and not only inner calm, but inner yearning, the cyclical sound is kind of like, it's nice. It's like there's a little bit of poetry to it. There's some, right? But then Rabbi Akiva says, but if you're on the same train, and you're going to some dreaded meeting, you're going to that court case or whatever, that you're guilty. The red light got, you got caught on the cameras, and there's no way you're going to talk your way out of it. That same cyclical sound of the train or the tick, tick of the clock is driving you absolutely mad. Because the human being seeks to have an inner harmony and an outer harmony that are in resonance with one another. If the outside world, he gives another example, Rabbi Akiva Tatz, he says, you walk into your house after a good day, and everything's exactly where it is, except maybe one of the chairs is like a little bit out of place. So you just walk over to the chair and you simply kind of like shift it a little bit because you want your inner world of tranquility to mirror the outer world of tranquility that's in front of you. And so there's a tiny bit of dissonance and you want to fix that, so you just move the chair ever so slightly. But if you walk into your house and everything is perfectly in order and you had the worst day and you've had it, you start to throw the chairs over. Hopefully not. Hopefully we have better midos than that. But the reason why people do that What does that? Makes no sense. You walk into your own house and you just start like tossing things around. It's because your inner world is in total chaos. Your inner world has somebody slamming on the cymbals. And you want the outer world to mirror that. And so Teshuva is the world that allows the song of life to come back together again. Because it allows your inner world to find its inner harmony, and so that the outer world also starts to sing. The chirping of the birds sound nicer when you're in a good mood, as opposed to this like ominous kind of like almost. Rav Kook writes in, well, hopefully one day we'll get there. We're moving so slowly, but we're not in a rush. Rav Kook writes in Oros HaTshuva itself that for the person who has not yet found the light of Tshuva, every sunrise, every sunset, every time the world is operating as it's supposed to, grates at them so strong. Because every single time the world is operating the way it's supposed to, it's a reminder of the fact, like, what's wrong with me that everything is doing what it's supposed to be doing? The sun rises when it's supposed to rise, it sets when it's supposed to set, the waves of the sea keep crashing down the way that they're supposed to, the birds are chirping and doing their thing and building nests, and the leaves are falling and growing back, and nature is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And I, with my free will, with my free choice, I just can't seem to get it together, or at least not the way that I'd like to. And so every time I come into a world that's operating smoothly, it causes me this pain. I don't hear the song of life. And so Teshuva returns us to the place, it's Poseach Shira, Shiras Adam Arishon. Bekocha Shel Teshuva, Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. Ki simachtani Hashem b'fa'alecha. I am happy, Hashem, with your creations. Because now I also am one of those creations that's doing the will of Hashem. B'maisi yadecha aranein, I will sing and exalt in the work of your hands. Kol eila hadvarim leprateim, ad kedei lehevim ad makom hamaisa. Now, this is for you, David. This is all very nice, says Rav Kook. I'm painting a very beautiful image for you. But what does this mean? How do we do this? How do I bring this to the Olam HaMaisa, Ad Makom HaMaisa? In the introduction to Oros HaTshuva, in the introduction to the Sefer Oros HaTshuva, Rav Kook has a small introduction, which we'll probably learn next time. And in the introduction, Rav Kook talks about how there is this, it's on the backs of what he's saying here, there's this untapped reservoir of tshuva content to be created. We're tapping into it a little bit here in this shiur. He says there's literature to be written about tshuva. He doesn't write this exactly, but there's children's books to be written about tshuva. There's all this stuff that there's art to be made about tshuva. There's music and songs to be made about tshuva. And then Rav Kook writes, and there's how-to guides. There's practical, step-by-step how-to guides of how to do tshuva. And those things are waiting to be written. And so Rav Kook says, I don't want to leave out the Olam HaMaisa. We have to bring all of this very nice theoretical idea to the world of practical application. Ad makom HaMaisa. Ulatimam l'chol madregas kulam. Till we bring it down to the most basic level of operating. A person has all of a sudden has this idea that falls into their mind. I want to write a Sefer Torah. I want to dedicate a Sefer Torah to my shul. Somebody recently told me that they wanted to do that. Do you know how much work goes into that practice? I mean, that's a very nice idea. In theory, that's like a very nice idea. But then you have to find the right sofer. You got to price it out. There's different sizes. There's better soferim and less. You got to find the mantle. The cover that goes on top of it. You have to decide what kind of wood you want it to be wrapped around, whether it's going to be an Ashkenaz or a Sephardi, the different types of script. There's all these different steps along the way. And so having just this kind of theoretical idea that I'd like to do tshuva is about 1,000 times more complicated than making a Sefer Torah or renovating your kitchen. And so how do I actually do this l'maisa? Ad makom ha'maisa. Ula'atimam l'chol madregos kulum. L'halos kol bechinos shel nefila shel kol echad miYisrael. And not only that, but says Rav Kook, and he's still here on this trepidation. He's writing to a confidant, to a friend, a student, but a friend. Am I worthy? Says Rav Kook to Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap, and says Dovid'l to all of you, am I worthy of attempting to explain a how-to guide of how to do this, how to do tshuva. This is not retiling a bathroom floor. This is each individual person. Kol bechina shel nefila shel kol echad miYisrael. It's so personal. Tshuva is v'sam b'yam derech. It's compared to a yam. It's compared to an ocean. Traveling through the path of tshuva is like traveling through an ocean in Chazal, because it doesn't leave even a trail. It's not like if you travel on Earth, so there's a path that maybe I could leave a trail that somebody else could follow. But if I'm a boat and I'm traveling through water, then the path that my boat took, there's no like real markers for any other boat that's going to come afterwards. So how am I supposed to do this? Kol bechina shel nefila shel kol echad miYisrael. Am chaviv, am kadosh, mikol makom shehu. Wherever we fall into as a nation, wherever we fall into as individuals, mikol omek ha'amakim, to the deepest depths that we've descended into, shel tachtios aretz, the place of deep subterranean kind of filth that we've fallen into. Bein b'maisa, bein b'das, whether our actions are out of line, or whether our way of looking at the world, our das, our philosophies are crooked. Ad k'tzei achron, till the very final step, the worst and the most corrupted amongst all of us. How is it that we're supposed to make a how-to guide? How am I supposed to do this? Rav Kook is saying, La'or ha'chaim v'davka la'ovilam and this is also important. V'davka la'ovilam b'simchos v'gil. How am I supposed to do this in a way that is going to present people with a happy version of tshuva? Below shum derech otzev, without bringing sadness to a single person. That's my goal, no less than this. I want a practical how-to guide that includes all of the light that I'm describing here, all of this very high way of thinking about kind of rewiring the way that human beings think about tshuva and seeing the song of life come to life, without saddening a single person. Uberach oz ugvuras ra'im. B'mesilos kodosh silulim u'misukalos. I want it to be a path which is salul, which means like fine flour, meaning like very finely trodden path, and misukal, which means like removed of any stones. Salek, to remove any stones. Misukalot. B'koach es galus nitzotzei oros shel yom geula. The only reason I even have the audacity, just a few more minutes here, the only reason I have even the audacity to attempt this is because as we're moving closer and closer to the final light of redemption, and the nitzotzei or, the sparks of redemption are starting to... Rav Kook says, you think that I would have the audacity to write this book in Poland? No way. Not a chance. B'koach es galus nitzotzei oros shel yom ha'geula ha'misgal lanu b'chol eis be'eretz ha'chaim. Be'eretz ha'chaim is not just talking about Be'eretz ha'chaim meaning in Eretz Yisrael. Al yidei keitz ha'magula shel harei Yisrael ha'ne'avadim v'nizraim. Just the other day I was walking from my house to the shul, to Mitzvah Ramot, and I counted 4 out of the 7 minim in full blossom. Rimonim, te'inim, geffen, there were some beautiful clusters of grapes, zaitim. I think those are the 4 that I saw. I didn't see any grain. We don't have grain fields here. We don't have the grain and the barley, and there were no dates, lamaisa. But okay, someone I'm sure has a date tree. Says Rav Kook, Chazal tell us already, there's no Kates Megula, there's no siman, there's no sign that the redemption is imminent than the fact that Eretz Yisrael starts to give off its fruit in abundance. So this is amazing. Rav Kook says, I have the audacity to write a sefer of tshuva that's going to be filled with the practicality and the illumination of everything that we're talking about here. The only reason I have the guts to even try it, says Rav Kook, is because I look around the Eretz Yisrael and I see that Eretz Yisrael is blooming. And if Eretz Yisrael is blooming, that means that Am Yisrael is ready to bloom. And there is a light which is ready to come down to the world. I'm ready to push the envelope even further than anyone has before, to attempt to expand the consciousness of our nation, to come to that place of Hadeya mit'ale ad rome oz, past the world of abstract thinking to a place which is beyond that, to return the world to its proper song, because I see that it's happening anyway. I see that the world is waking up. I see that Eretz Yisrael is waking up, which means that Hashem is giving me permission to do this. Al yedei keitza megula shel harei Yisrael. I see the mountains of Ramot that are blossoming with fruits, Hanavadim in Israel, which are doing their work and are starting to blossom. Hanosim pri va'anaf la'am Hashem asher darshuhu. They're giving fruit and branches to the nation of God that are requesting them. Levara kol eila ba'ofen maspik tzorech zman hagon upanoi. In order to do this, I'm going to need a little bit of time. 14 years. It took him 14 years from the time he wrote this letter till we had the Sefer Teshuva. Kidei lesalek et kol yiseidot hadrachim u'lahotzi esaor haganuz b'chol hamachshachim hapratim. It's going to take me a while to clear out the stones, to take out any possible stumbling blocks, in order to remove any swords or daggers that are in the way, and to reveal the light in all of the dark places. And I haven't been successful to do it yet. I haven't figured out how to do this yet. And if a person will try to come and to be mechadesh these types of things, these types of dvarim elyonim, these super exalted, very high spiritual concepts, to try to translate this into a workable system for the nation of God now, if a person is not willing to really embrace what I'm saying here, that the land is ready, the people are ready, Hashem is apparently ready, they will not be able to access Torah's emes. If a person doesn't see that the nation of the Jewish people, despite, things are looking pretty good in Eretz Yisrael in terms of the Torah output, the Tefillah output, the raw, compared to what Rav Kook had going on in his day. And yet Rav Kook says, if you're not ready to see, we were able to look backwards and see, Rav Aviner one time was asked, Rebbe, there are many Gedolim, and Rav Kook had a Mahalach, and other Gedolim had a Mahalach, and, how do we know that Rav Kook was right? So Rav Aviner said, because we're here to see it. We see he was right. We see that he was right. That's a Rav Kook didn't know that he was right. He thought he was right. He believed he was right. His students believed he was right. But we see that he was right. Now, okay, try to sell that to everybody. Again, nuance is important also. But to a certain degree, unbelievable that Rav Kook is saying, we won't be able to bring Am Yisrael to where they can get to if we don't believe what I'm saying here. Unfortunately, Am Yisrael took the bait. Ki kol zman meir b'tchunaso v'atz Hashem asher ya'atz le'echol or geula ma'olefes b'matmonei mistarim kimo sha'anu ro'im be'einenu. We see that all these things are hidden in their buried treasure. We see it with our own eyes. Umukefet b'hamun negayim shel aniyeh hadas sovle chalaim ruchnim. You look around all over the place and you'll see that there are people who are sovel all types of spiritual maladies, spiritual sicknesses. Vadai lo yo'ilu kol cheshbonos. No matter what type of cheshbonos we start to throw around and we try to make excuses for how to look at Am Yisrael, ha'olim b'leiv adam shemachshavotav hevel neged atzis Hashem elyona. No matter what you try to say when you look at Am Yisrael and try to say, look, this one has this problem, this group has this problem, these people, they're not connected to Torah in this way. This is what Rav Kook was looking at. And he was fighting a war to say, no, there's Torah buried in these people. There's life buried in these people. There's good character traits, there's musar, and just straight being like a good person that's buried in these people that you don't have access to over here with all of your Torah. And Rav Kook said, if you're going to ignore all of that, you're simply just turning a blind eye to what is, it's neged atzas Hashem elyona. It's neged atzas Hashem elyona. It's very clear that you're on the wrong side of history. Asher davar tov diber tov al Yisrael. Hashem is now speaking good about the Jewish people. Hashem is now presenting good about the Jewish people. L'chonein or geula b'derech chaim l'shar amo. Hasidim lios kulam shavei pesha. That the guarantee is that all of the Jewish people in the future are going to return from their mistakes. V'kol chalashas hanefesh, and any weakness of the soul, pachdanut, any fear, rifyon ruach, any weakness of the spirit, umugas lavav, kilel yachlof, like the night will disappear. It'll just as the night disappears, it'll melt off of us. V'ruach mo'oded m'malei chai yesha v'oneg Hashem v'godol levav v'rochev de'eh hegyon oz yikachas mekomu b'chol levavos. Instead, Hashem will give to the heart of every Jewish person a brand new way of looking at the world. Not dissimilar to what we find by Yosef HaTzadik when he was rushed out of the well that he was in, that bore that he was in, given new clothing, given a haircut, and brought to a new place of royalty. Yikachas makom b'chol levavos negashim al Hashem b'har kodesh la'atzmiach pedus b'achsheres hachayim la'ometz elokem mevaser b'tzva rav shal yitziras nefashos muchanos la'avodas ha'geula. Then the Jewish people will be prepared to take their rightful place in this hard work of bringing the redemption b'Yeshuas emes ha'oleches michayil al chayil b'gvuras yesha yamin elyon, which will continue to grow from strength to strength as we continue to go to the highest levels.
Das us wunna so vivindo Hamiskael Al chayos HaKodesh Nedar v'chava